On that basis, when the budget was put to us in 2010, we of the opposition criticized it, we critiqued it, we examined it, but at the end of the day, it was a better budget than we could have expected, because it was largely made up of policies that we had some involvement in, that we could support. And in 2010, something happened in this country that never happened before in Parliament. The opposition voted for the budget. We voted for the budget. Some of my own colleagues in the PNM criticized me and said that was poor leadership, because opposition doesn't vote for the budget, but we put the people of Trinidad and Tobago before the party. And the budget was one that we could support. And we gave the government the full support to go forward. Never mind, they went and made an absolute mess of it, because the development program was never executed and the economy stayed in decline and continued ever since. Towards the end of that same year, the government spent a lot of time trying to respond to national security issues, one of which was the whole question of information gathering in Trinidad and Tobago. The Prime Minister was in the center of it, and we came to Parliament in an urgent manner to pass a law, something called the Interception of Communication Bill. We worked with the government on that, and we passed that law in, I think, in 3 or 4 days. Because the Prime Minister told us a lot of horrible things were happening, and they had to be addressed. And we worked with the government to address it. And then, of course, they told us that the heart of the crime problem, where the killings were generated, were from gangs in certain areas in the country, and we wanted anti-gang legislation. Members of the PNM took the lead, Marlene McDonald, Colin Imbert, because they were more experienced than those who were there in the cabinet at the time, took the lead in ensuring that the anti-gang legislation was worked in committee and came out of committee to the congratulations of the government itself. And we passed the anti-gang legislation. It was assented to in August 2011. Now the government had a tool to allow the police to go out there and gather evidence on gang members and gang leaders, and when you get the evidence, you come forward and prosecute them. What did the government do? Within hours of proclaiming the law with no evidence in hand, the government, in response to 7 killings in Arima, declared a limited state of emergency. It was the first expression of the level of incompetence of Persad-Bissessar Prime Minister, until we eventually now know for a fact. She addressed the nation and talked about a limited state of emergency, when in fact what she has done was to create and establish a full-blown emergency across Trinidad and Tobago, and didn't know it. And did that when the police commissioner was out of the country, and deputy commissioner out of the country, and the opposition said, don't do it, you can damage the economy. And this is not a crime-fighting tool. And you have not established the legal basis for a state of emergency. Oh man, they ridiculed us. As a matter of fact, before she declared the state of emergency, when the reports came about the killings in Arima, I, for the second time, a PNM leader, took the initiative and said to the government, let us together talk to see what has to be done together in the Parliament or out of the Parliament, so we can work together to respond to the criminal element. She said, go to hell. You all were there, and you couldn't do nothing. You have nothing to offer. That was the Prime Minister whose budget I led my team to vote for. That was the Prime Minister who my team took the lead to work on the anti-gang legislation. But that is her style. That's her style. She went to Tobago and led a process of consultation in Tobago, 3-year process, where Tobagonians were working towards a position where they could put before the cabinet a position of what they think internal self-government should be. She tossed it aside and told Mr. Logan, you draft something, I'm carrying it to the Parliament. Tobago bill in the middle of an election. Well, we kicked that out of the Parliament, and they were kicked out of Tobago. And I don't particularly want to raise this example, but I must raise it for the country's record. With a matter of days to go before the deadline for the appointment of a president, we heard nothing from the government. On your behalf, we, the opposition, took the initiative to go to the government and say, let us together try and find somebody by consensus. So whoever goes forward from the parliament will have the full support of the parliament. That was an initiative of this opposition. We eventually got through the door to the Prime Minister, a matter of hours away from the deadline. 11:30 on Monday, deadline is Tuesday for the election of a president. But in style, it's all me. We went to the meeting. We suggested who we think could be considered, or the kind of person we think can be considered. The government said absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing in terms of who they would want to consider. In the end, the government offered a government candidate whom we can support, and a man whom we are all proud. He has our fullest support. But understand, this is a government that was approached by the opposition for consensus on this important matter, came to a meeting and didn't give us a single name to consider. Went and made their own decision. Fine, the law allows that, but don't come and tell me it's consensus. Imagine Ewell McLeod was in the meeting with the government, and while he was there, he was in fact a consideration for the presidency. So when they met the afternoon, with hours from the deadline, so serious was his candidacy that he had to leave the room so the others could determine if it's going to be he or Carmona. We have saved you from a fate worse than McLeod. But let me get back to the crime issue. So the government spent its initial early days fighting this issue of intelligence gathering and our intelligence systems. And as I talk to you today, the big issue for the government to explain is the government's attempt at putting in place an intelligence gathering structure. Because you see, when they came into office, they met a PNM response in place. And we are not saying that the PNM response has to be the current government response at all. A new government is free to come up with their own ideas, policies and programs. But the one thing the PNM had come to a conclusion on is that in order to have the police act effectively against the criminal element in this country, there needs to be a body of high-quality officers, trustworthy officers, who could gather the intelligence which will become evidence to allow the police to apprehend and prosecute and get conviction against criminals. So the PNM took policemen, gazetted officers. They took soldiers, official officers gazetted. They took customs officers and had all of them tested, because I tell you one thing, and when they fail it, and they couldn't get in, SORT became the worst thing in the world. But SORT had to be a group of officers whom you can trust. One of the biggest problems in our failure in fighting crime is that some of the police don't even trust the police. And the population doesn't trust the police. And without the population and that trust, the police is leaping in the dark and is largely ineffective. So the requirement for an intelligence gathering body that is largely trustworthy and clean was SORT. But SORT as an organization, you could say you could do it by way of a legislative unit and say it's a statutory body. Or you could use police officers and soldiers to work together because they are already police officers and they are already soldiers. They call that illegal. And they always refer to SORT as the illegal sort. They have not been able to bring a single case of illegal activity against SORT. But the Prime Minister is in the lead talking about the illegal sort. And from the time her name was called as leader of the majority, she decided she wanted to close down sort. Let me show you how your country has been run, or is being run. In October of 2010, I have in my possession a letter written by a mid-rank police officer. And the reason why this letter is important is because it says a lot of things about our police service and about our Prime Minister and about your circumstance. So a new Prime Minister comes into office. That Prime Minister is automatically the head of the National Security Council. Chairman of the National Security Council. That Security Council is made up of the heads of all the security officers, the Army, Coast Guard, the police, the customs and so on. So you imagine this new Prime Minister who promised us, she promised us in her manifesto that her immediate goal, and I want you, Tobago and Trinidad, to listen to this. In her manifesto, she promised us that her immediate goal will be to introduce greater transparency and accountability in government. She comes into office, becomes the head of the National Security Council, does not go to the National Security Council meeting. As a matter of fact, we were informed at the time that they were not holding national security meetings. She goes to a mid-level police officer of dubious character and asks him what to do. And listen to what he had done for you. Listen to me very carefully. I'm reading here from a document to the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, from a superintendent so-and-so. And if there's one thing police good at, old police especially, is covering the rear end. This officer knew what he was doing. He was reporting directly to the Prime Minister. See a problem there? Have you seen a problem there? This mid-level police officer, unbeknownst to the Commissioner of Police and the National Security Council, is reporting directly to the Prime Minister, and he knows it's wrong. So what does he do? He's covering his rear end. So the letter starts as this. At 12:15 p.m. on Monday, 11th October 2010, I was contacted by the Honorable Prime Minister. Get that? She called me. And he goes on to slander everybody who he wanted to get out of the way in the security system of Trinidad and Tobago. Let me repeat that. A police officer, mid-rank police officer, is reporting directly to the Prime Minister, slandering and destroying the careers and the investment that you made in people to look after your security. And I don't have time to read the whole letter, but I will give it to the media so they can publish it. We don't have time. But let me tell you what the letter contains. Listen to the basis of this police officer reporting to the Prime Minister. After he named names and slander people, he said they are supporters of the PNM and extremely loyal to Mr. So-and-so. And then he goes on to identify them. 6 telephone intercept officers, and he names them: Susan J, Anna M, Conrad B, Christopher F, and C, Arlene V. These are senior people in your security system, who you taxpayers spend millions to train and put there to look after your security. He goes on to say, in addition to the above, the following persons are very loyal to Mr. So-and-so, and the Mr. So-and-so is Mr. Clement. Did you recall the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago on her way to Jamaica, stay in Piaco Airport, and fire Brigadier Joseph because somebody told her he was spying on her? And she and her cabinet had a lot to say with Mr. Clement. Well, this is the letter that the police officer wrote to her telling her who is PNM and who to get rid of.